Recording in
Nomai, Harimai, welcome everybody to this AMA online session. Firstly, thank you for giving up your time and for being here. Um, so just a few housekeeping. If you have any questions as you hear the wonderful session today, just feel free to put it on the chat. Um, we will navigate this discussion and find appropriate places to respond to the questions, or we might just sum it up at the end and respond to the questions. So we will just play by the ear and we'll see how we go. And this session is being recorded, so if you don't want to be in the video, you can, shut your video and just be, as just as a voice. Um, During the session, please mute yourself, or otherwise I might have to use my power and mute you. So welcome. We have our session is about understanding my location by exploring data in CODAP, and I would like to pass on to lovely Leticia Perez, who will introduce and take us further. So, Leticia.
Yes, and I was going to say good morning. It's a good afternoon for me, but kia ore, is that? I think just killed it.
Kia ora.
Uh, Kia ora. Good morning. It is a really exciting time anytime Pip asks me to do something with her. And so I am thrilled to be calling in and sharing some resources that a project that I have been working on has produced. So I'm going to be sharing a lot of the resources today and giving you all edit access in a few moments. So that is, I also apologize. I just upgraded to a 35-inch screen, which is magnificent, but also means that all of the controls are new and is producing some challenges for me today, despite practicing. So today we're going to talk about understanding my location and in CODAP and a little bit about me before we hop in and we allow some other folks to join us. My name is Leticia. I'm a former high school science teacher, and I come to the world of data and math and statistics as someone who's really curious. Currently, I'm a senior professional learning specialist from WestEd, which is a nonprofit organization in the United States. And there we support learners from early childhood all the way through adult into job training and job placement. But particularly, I spend a lot of my time thinking about data fluency. And I like to say data fluency because it really goes beyond just making sense of data, but really helping people explore topics of interest to them and recognizing that data fluency isn't something that stops in school, that we're always learning and growing, and new tools are being developed for us to make sense of data. So I thought I'd start off with a quick connection, knowing people are calling in and the weather might be lovely and folks are deciding whether to call in or not. So what place are you calling in from today? And you have two options to engage. You can put it in the chat, or if you have a camera on and you want to hold up a number, you can go analog with your hands. So what place are you calling in from today? One, office. Two, like a main room, which might be like a salon or a living room. Maybe you're calling in from outside because it is glorious. Maybe more of a kitchen space. Or five would be like not at home or an other. 1, 1, 4. Looking at the chat here, we've got a main room and an office. Okay, so we're all calling from different places in our homes or our spaces. So then when I think of places, I think of other things like home, and I know that we're in very different geographical places. So when it comes to a place that feels like home, I just recently watched Wicked, the musical, and there's no place like home. So what place feels like home? If you had to come up with a phrase or a description, I want you to think about that and then go ahead and write it in the chat. What place feels like home? Thank you. I've got hills near the beach, any place with a forest or the sea. Ah, yes, Sandra, where my family is. Sometimes when we think about home or places that remind us of home, they're physical locations, but it could also be the people that we're associated with. But it also could be like a nature, a place that has a similar climate or region feels similar. And as I was looking at pictures of New Zealand, because I'm going to visit next summer, I was realizing how some areas look really similar to where I'm at, which is in Oregon. So our outcomes for today are really to understand how can we use this new plugin to explore data about different locations. And because teachers are very, very busy and you don't always have time to explore data, I want to give you some time to play with the plugin and ask questions and have fun together. So we're going to start off having a really brief conversation about place and data and its connection. And then we're going to play with the plugin, and we're actually going to use two plugins today. And then we'll have some conversation informally about how these tools might be relevant to your students or your classroom. And if you have questions, we're a small group, so please feel free to unmute. If you'd like me to say something again, sometimes I get excited and I talk really quickly. Or you can also use the chat to voice any questions or wonderings. So just some working agreements. I mentioned I'm on a new device, which always causes some awkward moments. Just a reminder that as we work together, definitely have questions. Participate in ways if you need something answered in order to fully participate, please ask me, and recognize that we're all coming from different levels of expertise and experience, and learning online sometimes can be messy. And so we just have to be flexible. So I mentioned I'm outside of Oregon. This is an aerial photograph of where I'm calling from right now. And this is my place, my hometown. And it's interesting to me when I think about place because we're all in the same place right now in these little Zoom windows, even though we're in very different locations. And so when I think about data investigations, a lot of times I approach this idea of data from how does data change from place to place? How does my perspective of data be impacted by the place that the data were collected in? Would it change if I went to a different location? And when we think about place, lots of times we think of geography, but place is much bigger than geography. Place, as we said, like just as home could be a person, or a home could be a building, or a home could be an ecosystem. When we think about place, place is really large. It includes cultures and traditions. We just had Halloween, and Halloween is rainy and wet and cold here, and that is a part of my experience. The weather shapes the way that I interact with Halloween. And you are not having that weather pattern right now. So it shapes it differently. Our identity, our beliefs, our experience, and whether we're all doing the same thing all shape what we think about as place. So the last thing I'll mention before we play in with some data is this idea of working with data. And there's a lot of different cycles that are used to describe investigating with data. And in classrooms, students and your schedules are so very busy. And it's wonderful that students get an opportunity to move all the way through and do a full statistics investigation. And sometimes we run out of time and we might need to just focus on one component. So today, we're just having a moment together. We're not going to be able to do everything. I'm going to give you a couple of pieces, and it'll be up to you to decide whether it's relevant. At the end, I have my email because I'm actually showing you two things that were just developed. They haven't been shared publicly, so you're actually the first group of folks who are getting to look at the materials. So before I begin, just so I know how fast or how slow to go, if you could rate your familiarity with CODAP, one as in like you've never used it, or maybe you just saw it in the session before for the first time. And then 5, like you've used it with students, you're pretty familiar and comfortable. If you could in the chat give me a 1 to 5 scale about your familiarity with CODAP, that would be quite helpful. Oh, looking at this variation. Fantastic. So because we're across from a 1s and 3s and 5s, if you are more advanced, please feel free to go at a pace that meets you and your needs. I'm going to provide this material, and I'll do a really brief introduction, and we will go ahead and get into the file. So if you're new to CODAP, CODAP is a tool that is designed to visualize data, and it was designed for students and learners in mind. It wasn't designed for industry professionals. So there's a lot of amazing things that you can do really quickly. And then there are, like any tool, there are both strengths, and then there are things that maybe it wasn't designed to do. This tool that we've developed is called the Day Length plugin, and the Day Length plugin is right here. It allows us to type in a location, and for that location, it will pull a series of variables or attributes for that particular location or place. And as I said, my hometown is Wilsonville, Oregon. When I type it in and click get data, all of these attributes for a year are automatically populated. The second plugin I have in here today is to help us accommodate how some people might be more familiar with CODAP or less familiar with CODAP, is this plugin called Story Builder. And so up top, our first task that we're going to do together when I share this link will be this first moment. As you click through the moments, it changes the view and gives you different sets of information and different investigations that you might explore. So our goal today in our short time is to go through 3 different moments of this data. Now, because we're a small group, I think we'll just hang out here in the whole room and investigate together rather than going into breakout rooms. But I wanted to invite you to have a few minutes to actually play with the data yourself. So I'm going to give you 2 different links. The first link that I'm going to provide to you is the link to this actual deck that I'm using right now. And this is an edit version. So what that will do is it'll allow you to put any kind of notes, or if you take an image or if you have questions, you'll be able to add it to the document yourself. The second thing that you'll be able to do in this edit link is you'll be able to go to slide 14. On slide 14, I believe it's slide 14. On this slide, you'll be able to access the CODAP file. So I'm going to escape so you can see. You'll be able to access, slide 15, the CODAP file, either by clicking Leticia's place, selecting the photograph, or if you want to cut and paste for some reason, if your window's not working, this is going to open up our CODAP file, which should then look like this. So this is an invitation to look at the data for my place. And we'll spend a few minutes doing that. And then once we're done, we're going to look at and compare the data from my place to Auckland. And then we're going to use a simulation to further explore the data. So for those of you that are new to CODAP, to make a graph, because our data is already present in the table to save us some time, you're going to select graph and then drag any attribute that you want to the axes. Now you have a lot of choices. We have our traditional X and Y. You could bring something to this third Y axis, and you can drop things on top. Categorical variables can also be dropped in the middle. And then we have some tools that allow us to add things like mean or center, or we can even change the color. Let's say orange offends you today and you're more in a green mood. For our work right now, I'm going to invite you to spend about 8 minutes using this data. Create some plots that help you describe how the length of day changes over time for Wilsonville, Oregon. And once you've made a few plots and played with the data and have done that, I have some bonus rounds, maybe exploring some outliers, changing the palette, or investigating some relationships between other attributes. So the steps are right here. They're also the same steps that are in the deck in case you have limited screen space. And if you want to put your camera off and play with the data for about 5 to 8 minutes, we'll come back and you can ask some questions.
So the questions there on the chat. Is it possible to create more than one graph?
Absolutely. So we can create multiple graphs. I could look at the sunrise hour. On this configuration tab, there are some options. Something that's unique about CODAP is that it looks at the data type and limits the graph options based on the data type. So if you have a numeric value, it's not going to make like a typical bar chart that maybe students might force it into. Also, if you have categorical values, it's not going to let you do a scatter plot. So you can do multiple graphs. I just didn't want to clutter up my space. You can also minimize the windows, so that way you have a lot more workroom. You can also look at the map and zoom out. I showed you that aerial photograph of where I'm at. If you wanted to use the map, because we have latitude and longitude in this data set, you can look at the location as well.
Interesting to see that in July you've got 15.6 some kind of daylight. My goodness.
This whole plugin came to be because my kids asked me why they had to go to bed when it was still light outside. And it was 10 o'clock and you could still be outside and there's still a fair amount of light. We have some really long days in the summer.
So you just draw the curtain and have the night feel.
We have all have blackout curtains and eye masks, yes.
My question along those lines would be, do you have any data that shows the student sleep time against their achievement, in terms of how the daylight affects?
You know, this is actually a really big debate because we, as a state, have voted to remove changing the clocks 2 times a year. But now we're arguing which time would be better and safer for students. Is it better for us to stay on standard time or daylight savings time? And if we stay on standard time, it would be late in some parts of our country. The sun wouldn't be up sometimes till 8 a.m. in some places. And so they're worried about or 8 to 8:20 for kids walking to school and it being dark. And so there's definitely some questions about daylight and safety and what is best. In the winter, it's 4:30. It gets dark pretty late. What are some discoveries that we found in playing with the data?
Noticed you just changed to daylight, changed out of daylight saving, is it?
So we actually changed tomorrow night on our side. And there's an interesting phenomenon in the data when you look at time change, because depending when the data are reported, different parts of the world actually celebrate the time change at different dates. And so we're approaching changing the clocks, which is great because right now I'm jogging in the dark in the morning, and I'm actually happy for it to be lighter in the morning. Not everybody, like people who are morning people, they're not so thrilled.
Yeah, it came up on a day length hours versus date plot as just a single point, which is interesting. It suggests that there's an adjustment for that, but there is at a data point, at least one data point represented still. So it's not, yeah.
So there's this designation as to when the time hops. And so we have these two little funny points, which at first, some people might say that they're outliers, but we see this artifact of the system, the places that we're in, and our cultural norms about deciding that time should change show up in our data in this funny little interesting way. Any other discoveries?
There's another question by Sandra. Can you have more than one graph window, or do you just change the one graph you're working with?
So you definitely could have multiple windows. So let's say that I'm now curious. I see that the day length is something that is varying for where you're at, but I'm really curious about the seasons. And so I want to think about how the seasons vary in terms of day length. So you can have multiple windows open at the same time, or you can choose to change the window that you're working in. Sometimes you grab a variable, like I get this date and day and mixed up sometimes, and I realize I really don't want that attribute at all. So you can change one single graph, or you can have multiple graphs open at the same time.
So Leticia, do you want to just open another graph? Just click on a new blank graph.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, so you can just have as many of those open as you want, Sandra.
As many as your real estate on your screen will let you have. And we also have this undo button. So if you do something and you're like, oh no, I didn't want to do that, it's really great that you can step back in time, and it just allows you to explore and iterate really quickly. So, I mean, my place is interesting for me because it's my place, but if I'm you, I'd probably be like, well, I actually am really much more interested in data for my location. So what this is going to allow us to do is we're going to advance to this second box up here, which is box number 2, and it says look at data for your place. By clicking it, it's going to ask me to save. Go ahead and say yes. And it should bring you to a new window that looks really similar to the window that we were just looking at. So everyone go ahead and click on this second box here. And then I'm going to invite you to put in your location. Now, I know you're not all calling from the same part of New Zealand, but for this example, I'm going to type in Auckland, New Zealand, and make sure that all of the attributes are selected. And you know that they're selected because they're this like light teal color. And I'm going to fetch that data by selecting Get Data. So let's pull some data for New Zealand. And if you want to choose a place other than Auckland, by all means, feel free. One thing that you'll notice is because we went to the second moment, there are different types of questions that I've prepared and different bonus rounds to help guide you through investigating. These are the same attributes, but for a different location. So I invite you to make several more graphs about the data for your location.
So I don't have the story builder bar. Did I hide it somewhere, or?
It could be minimized. Perhaps you might see a teal bar, or if you moved it around, if you move the windows, it's really easy to cover it like this.
I'm like, what did I do?
So if that happens, just go back to the chat and open up a new file.
Okay, thank you.
Not a problem.
Like, Sandra, to fetch the data, you click on Get Data.
Yes, right here. If you're not entirely sure what the attributes mean, you can hover over and it'll give you a description.
Leticia, I think you should explore what Dunedin is going to look like in terms of hours next June to realize you're not really coming here in summer.
Yes, no, it's summer for me, but not summer for you. I'll be coming in June. So in June, let's see, it's going to be, this is a quiet what? A nice thing about CODAP is that you can also like focus in on, so since I'm coming to your place in June, I can focus in and hide the other data and just zoom in onto a particular time. So for this point, I'm going to hide the other data and, oh, did it backwards. I'm going to hide my unselected data and just focus in on this. Oh yes, look at this. The day length, the days are getting shorter and shorter. So I'm coming in closer to your winter break.
I think you're with us at the start of July, aren't you?
Yep, it's like right at the end of June, beginning of July.
Yep.
So this
Shorter
is
start.
its darkest time.
Well, on the optimistic side, it's more party time.
More party time. You
Yeah.
know, and it'll be summer for the rest of me for the rest of the time when I come back. So I'll get 2 seasons in a short amount of time. So when we think about like pulling data for place, I have the solar intensity as well. Solar intensity as a science person to me is really interesting because it's the amount of energy that's the Earth is receiving on that day from the sun. And so while I'm interested in day length, like how much time might I have to go outside before it gets dark, I'm also thinking about the intensity. How much solar energy is there on that time, because that impacts things like weather, like the surface temperature of the Earth or the air temperature. It also can impact the amount of clouds that are produced in a region, and the amount of solar intensity that comes into a space determines the climactic region. Like what is it like to live there? So when, as a science person, one of the things that I'm really interested in is the total amount of sunlight over time and how that varies back and forth throughout the year. But I'm also really interested in like that energy aspect and thinking about that seasonally. Are there any interesting discoveries that you made looking at your data? I'm learning that you change your clocks at different times than we change our clocks. But I really didn't trust these values because I'm not from New Zealand. When I saw these 2 points, I'm used to looking at these 2 points on my graph, and I know when we change the clocks. So then I looked at these, I was like, do you really change your clocks around the first week of April every year? And that's a yes. I went to the internet because working with the team to create the system, when we think about collecting data and we think about places where data might be inaccurate or incorrect, the people who are shaping the data and making the tools have a lot of impact on the data itself. And it's easy to take for granted. I'm in the Northern Hemisphere, and I know I don't need to tell you how Northern Hemisphere centric the world is, and everything is often oriented towards the Northern Hemisphere. This shows up in our data as well. It shows up in sunlight angle. So if I put sunlight angle, when sunlight comes into the Earth, we report it generally from 0 to 90 degrees, but because our Earth is a sphere, they set 0 at the North Pole, 90 at the equator, and 180 at the South Pole. So when the data itself looks like, if you reported it, a student would say, oh, the sunlight is coming in at 150 degrees. That's actually might be true on a protractor if you're imagining the Earth from outer space, but that's not the actual angle of the incoming light. And so this opportunity to have conversations with students about like data are so important, and data and evidence-based discussions are important, but we also need to recognize that human decisions go into the process of data. And we need to ask critical questions of the data and thinking about how our perspectives might be impacted by culture or place or tradition are important conversations that we want to make sure students, especially as they move towards high school, that they're getting lots of opportunities to have. How can you categorize the data to show the example, the seasons within solar intensity? Let's see. So I think, Sandra, one question would be is we could look at the solar intensity, how it varies, break it out by seasons. And then I could also put them in order if like I wanted them in a specific order. You can drag them back and forth. I'm not sure if that was the question that you were asking though. No, let's see. How can you categorize the data to show the, you just had solar intensity on X. Let me flip.
I think it's the idea that you drop a legend in, Leticia, which you've got there.
Yes. Okay. So if you have a categorical variable, and you can do it for numeric as well, is that you can drag it into the center, and then it will add this color code legend for the different values, which makes it a lot easier to read. I could also do it, I don't know if this would make sense, but, and then it would put it into quintiles, and I could look at the sunrise time if I wanted to. It might not be a productive investigation, but you can layer in another attribute that way. Thank you,
So
Pip.
you can have 3 variables. So if you put something like daylight hours on the horizontal axis.
Daylight hours. Oh, yep.
Yeah. Yeah. No, on the other one you were working on. Anyway, just have 2. You've got, yeah.
And you can actually quite have quite a bit.
And
because
now
Say
if
again?
you drop seasons in as, so you've got 2 attributes, and now you're going to bring a third one in, which is the season. Yeah, and if you just click off, because you've got some highlighted cells, so you can see the seasons are sitting under there. It's quite hard to see with that graph, the solar intensity one.
Probably easier to see. Oh, inverse.
Well, you get the same in both parts of the year. Get it coming in and coming.
Now, when we are talking about things that are interesting, like informally, we've been talking about the data comparing from place to place. And so if we progress to the third moment, I have the data pulled already for both of our locations. And these are plots I made them side by side so we could look at how we really are in opposite seasons at the same time. So with both locations, we can compare Auckland to Wilsonville. And one of the things I got so excited about, I was like, oh, this is an example of a transformation informally when we think about shapes and how can we connect data to other concepts. This idea that they are these mirror images. And what does that mean for experiences, Christmas, and what does it feel like in different regions? I might want to look at weather data to better understand what it's like to be in a different location, to give more flavor to that data.
Leticia, could you just show us how you made, say, that first graph? Could you make it, do a new one from scratch, just to show us?
So one of the building ways that I like to do to get familiar with a new tool is I try to copy the plot that someone else has made. So a nice thing is, a tip is you can always drag an attribute from one plot to the other, but we're going to go from the beginning. So first I put the date on the X, and I have day length on the Y. And this is quite exciting. Here you can see this reflection of the two, but sometimes especially for students, a lot of information to look at patterns at once could be quite overwhelming. So we layered in the location like we did last. And so this allows me to look at, okay, now I can see New Zealand versus Wilsonville. But this question that Sandra asked earlier about season was really interesting. So instead, I layered season on it. So now I have the seasons, and I'm going to click off, and I can see that we're indeed in opposite seasons throughout the year. But I wanted to break it up and look at just Auckland and then just Wilsonville. So I took this location and added it. And that allows me to focus just on one region, tell the story of Wilsonville, and think about how the seasons are changing over time.
Thank you.
There is one other cool, like this is a really big plugin, and if you use it and you find weird things, you have my email. Please let me know. Like I said, this is just got completed a couple of weeks ago. But there's one other piece to this plugin that I want to show you with a little bit of the time that we have left, and that is the simulation piece. As I mentioned, my background is in science. And so one of the things that we wanted to be able to do was to think about how do we represent data in different ways, because data can be quite abstract, and making sense of what does it mean to be in Auckland when it's here in July? What does it mean to be in Wilsonville when the sun doesn't set till very late, past 9 p.m.? And so one of the phenomenon that we think about is how our climates and our regions have very different ecosystems. And so this is a simulation that's connected to the data. So what I can do is I'm going to just create a simple plot of the solar intensity. And I will have it for my two locations. So the solar intensity is tied to how much sunlight comes into a region at one time. And so now what I can do is I can go all the way till today. Well, for me, which is November 1st. And I can look at the solar intensity visually in the data. And you'll notice that that point is highlighted in the table and the graph. And now I have an image to help me think about what does it mean to have this much solar energy at this unit of time and the value. And if I wanted to compare it to Wilsonville, you're headed towards summer, I'm headed towards winter. So if you had to predict what would these arrows look like when I go to Wilsonville, would I predict that there would be more arrows and there would be greater solar intensity, or would I predict that there would be less arrows and less solar intensity? I can do some prediction in my head, and then I can choose a different location. It's not loaded in here, so I have to put Wilsonville. So now I can toggle between New Zealand and Wilsonville. And here we see that the value is much lower. The light is coming in at an angle. It is cooler, and that's going to mean the season is changing, shorter days, less amount of heat. This also allows students to dig into the phenomenon itself about thinking about what does it mean for the amount of energy coming into the sun by zooming in close up. And maybe I'm actually, maybe I like to go to Australia for vacation and I don't really want to look at Wilsonville. I can change the location to somewhere else and get a whole new batch of data for somewhere else. And this is really important because in the phenomenon, regions that share the same latitude have generally the same amount of solar intensity. So they generally have a similar climate. But longitudes changing the longitude can have quite a different type of ecological region. So this is an integration of another way to think about data and interact with data to help make it more concrete and explore both science and math principles. questions about the simulation, we've covered a lot of ground and it's 3:42 and we'll be wrapping soon. So I don't know if there are questions about the simulation itself. Hopefully you're getting a chance to click around and try manipulating it. You'll notice as you go through time, you can see that these values change. If you want to think about time more on a video, as a lot of students are used to kind of a video or modeling the season, you can move between this model and also the graphical representation. So some resources that I wanted to share that are point out to you in the deck just while we have a few minutes left. One is in the slide deck on 31. You'll find my contact information. And as I said, that these are new plugins. These plugins were just developed this quarter. If you're interested in further exploring how solar energy impacts different environments, there is an additional plugin that we've developed, and this one's even newer, which allows you to pull precipitation data for the entire globe. It allows you to look at UV index. So it's a similar interface, but it collects data for other variables like cloud percentage, soil moisture. And so this is another plugin with a similar design that allows you to gather place-based data. You have access to both of those files here. And hopefully by the end of the month, they'll be in the CODAP drop-down window, and they'll be very much easier to find. But you have access. You're welcome to use them in any way that you like. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Could I have the link? Yes, most definitely. So in closing, as we wrap up this time, if you have used any data that is place-based, I'd love to hear it. If you have any thoughts about how you might use it for students or questions, this space is yours. I always like to think that teachers should get the last word in these types of presentations. So if you have questions, wonderings, requests, the floor is yours. You can unmute and ask questions, or you can put them in the chat. Ooh, wave data. I have not had that request, Sandra. That is going on my list. I do know that NOAA has wave data. I will look into that. So one of the things that I was excited about the NASA plugin, as we had mentioned, a lot of data sets are usually just by country. And so it's sometimes challenging to find data sets that are global. And so there are many more attributes that are available. This is our first prototype. And so we pulled data that were most related to ecosystems. But I will do some looking to see if that global like sea surface height temperature, which I know they measure that from space, I will see if that's available. And if it is, if you email me, I will let you know and I can send a CODAP file with it to you. Any other questions or wonderings? Well, as we wrap up this session, I just want to encourage you to look for opportunities to have conversations with students about the roles of decision making. Pip and I have had a lot of conversations about bringing a curious stance to data when we're curious about where the data come from, how they were collected, what can we do with the data, what stories can we tell. It really opens up this investigation mindset. And so encourage you to try it and let us know how it goes. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you, Leticia. This was a fantastic session and filled with, a lot of interactive ways of engaging. I certainly enjoyed it and learned a few new things myself. So, thank you so much. Um, yeah, and I think people, the participants have responded through the chat and they've all enjoyed. I am certainly, as we wrap up for the year, I'm certainly going to play with this tool more in my class, particularly in my junior class, and I'm pretty sure it will make sure that the engagement level is there all the way until the last day of school. So, yeah,